These bills before the House are one of the most savage attacks on the Australian safety net in living memory, and without a doubt the most savage attack so far by this ruthless government on the Australian safety net since they've been elected. These bills are the classic Abbott playbook of double-dealing. It is a sneaky, dishonest attempt to fundamentally recast the Australian social contract. This worthless government is attempting to stampede helter-skelter, harsh and unprecedented cuts to Australia's family payments, income support and pension system. This is an unparliamentary assault on millions of Australians by this worthless government, intent on ripping away money from low and middle income earners, from young job seekers and senior Australians. And wrapped in this package of cuts and broken promises is the government's ruthless and dishonest attack on pensioners, which in some sort of attempt at peak absurdity are now both before this chamber and the Senate. Today, Labor will vote against $11 billion worth of cuts. We vote against these cuts because these changes, like the rest of the budget, undermine people the opportunity to be part of a living community. These changes in this bill take little account of the true need of millions of Australians. These changes further diminish the chance for dignity, further diminish the chance of Australians to participate equally in our country. These changes reduce people below a standard of income when they have been overtaken by unemployment, illness, disability, veteran service or indeed age. But the real shame of these changes is the loss of hope they provide people, and it is frightening. There are people in this country who currently have no money to fall back on, and these changes hurt them. There are many people in this country with the stress of rent, and these changes hurt them. There are parents, as we talk, who cannot afford to give their kids some dollars each week for a birthday present at a friend's party, for the school excursion, for the right to participate in musical lessons or sports carnivals. Even worse, there are children who know not to ask their parents for money because their parents cannot supply it, and these changes hurt their hope. This government is adding to the despair of a great many Australians, and it should hang its head in shame. Look at the changes they're doing. They're abolishing the family tax benefit B for families with children over 6. Where did they say that before the last election? They're leaving young people with no income support for 6 months. Where did they say that before the election? They're shifting young people from New Start to the lower youth allowance, leaving them $2,500 a year worse off. They've abolished the senior supplement. We saw this pathetic excuse of a Prime Minister try and pretend that abolishing the senior supplement in question time was no big deal. It leaves seniors nearly $900 a year worse off. They've got rid of the pensioner education supplement. They've bulleted the education entry payment. They're freezing family tax benefits for 2 years. They're reducing family tax benefit end-of-year supplements and ceasing indexation. They're applying an interest charge to certain student debts, and they're replacing student start-up scholarships with income-contingent loans. Labor will vote against these measures, and Labor will vote against the government's cuts to the pension. Joe Hockey said there are many hard days in opposition. Well, what he is right about is this. It is always a hard day every time we listen to this government lie about cutting pensions. It is always hard for the true believers in a proper safety net in this country when these people opposite and these ministers, these worthless ministers, say we're not touching the pension goes up every 6 months. What a pack of disreputable twisters they are. We know and they know that the rate of indexation is being cut. No wonder the Tasmanian MP leaves. Look what they're doing to Tasmania. No hope and no chance. Run away and run out of here. The electorate will still find you. On the day before the I've got your back, come in, Spinner. The day before the 2013 election, Tony Abbott promised He promised no cuts to pensions, no changes to pensions. These bills are irrefutable proof that Tony Abbott's word is not worth the paper it is written on. The verdict is in, the evidence has been found, the smoking gun is there. This government has broken its promise on pensions. And after lying to pensioners to get elected, the Prime Minister wants to cut seniors' concessions, he wants to abolish the senior supplement, he wants to cut pensions, he wants to freeze superannuation, he wants to give Australia the world's oldest retirement age, he wants to punish senior Australians with a petrol tax, a GP tax, new costs for pathology tests, new costs for diagnostic imaging. And this chap who would be Prime Minister of Australia does not even know the changes he's making. You know you're in trouble when you know less about the health system than the Health Minister. And they are, in their own budget papers, the document that dare not speak its name, show that $450 million is coming out of the pockets of Australia's pensioners in the first 4 years alone. $450 million off pensioners. I bet they're high-fiving each other over on the blue carpet land. It's a good day's work done when they can do over the pensioners. Anyway, they think pensioners are leaners, don't they? According to the Parliamentary Budget Office, the cut to the age pension will be almost $7 billion per year 10 years from now. The Australian Council of Social Services has estimated that Tony Abbott's pension cuts will cost pensioners $80 per week within 10 years. That's more than $4,000 ripped out of the pockets and purses of our most vulnerable Australians. What has happened to the once so-called small L Liberal Party? There is nothing more extinct in Australia than a small L Liberal. They should hand back the name Liberal, hand it back, and instead be called the Radical Conservative Party of Australia, because that's what they are. They are the extreme right wing, the Tea Party. They're going to cut the age pension, they're going to cut carer payment recipients, disability support pensioners, and the veterans get a whack on the way through by this mob. It is bad enough that we have a Treasurer who thinks that poor people don't drive cars. But it is even worse, in fact, that the Prime Minister thinks that they should have to pay for his broken promises, his unscrupulous desire to say and do anything to win power and then forget the promises he made before then. Well, today Labor disagrees most sincerely with this government's propositions. Labor dissents from the vision of this country, the bleak and sterile vision that those opposite would give Australia. We have fought these pension cuts. We've had a few victories, haven't we, Member for Menzies, and we will continue to fight them. There was some trifle, I think, moment in the parliamentary debate where there was pause given yesterday to reflect that it was Gough Whitlam who first recognised the need to link pension levels to the growing standards and costs of living within the broader Australian community. Whitlam was right then, and Labor is right now. We will stand by Australians who've worked hard their whole life, paid taxes their whole life, made a contribution, built our communities, raised their children. We will stand by these people. We will fight for their right to a secure and dignified retirement. Let us be clear, the age pension is not a king's ransom or a windfall going to this so-called leaners in Australian society. It's a most modest sum. I'd like to see some of these people opposite live on it. Let's be clear, the pension is a post-retirement income support payment. It is not a family payment or a subsidy or a supplement that helps with other costs. For millions of Australian pensioners, it represents their entire household income. And this mob opposite, with such rank disrespect for the political word and promises they made, would cut the indexation rate. And then, in the height of arrogance, they come to Parliament every question time and they lie about lying. Gough Whitlam recognised this fundamental principle in the 1970s. He announced a commitment to maintain a pension rate at 25% of average weekly earnings. Gough Whitlam's vision was for an Australia where all aged people can live in comfort and dignity. Whitlam recognised that the government has a responsibility to help pensioners keep up with the cost of living. But this government disagrees. This recalcitrant, conservative, extreme right-wing mob only have one plan for Australia's retirees. It is to push pensioners below the poverty line. They think pensioners don't drive cars. They think that pensioners should have to pay more for their medicines and going to the GP. They think that pensioners should pay more for the diagnostic imaging, which may well help prolong their lives. They think that pensioners do not deserve the modest concessions they receive. And they certainly don't think that pensioners deserve the security and certainty of a fair pension. After 12 long years of neglect under the previous Conservative government, it took another Labor government in 2009 to increase this benchmark to 27.7% of male total average weekly earnings and to introduce a new pensioner and beneficiary living cost index. We sit for every question time. When confronted with these facts, the Prime Minister constantly says, "I'm doing pensioners a favour," and he's cutting their indexation. Well, I hope the Prime Minister keeps lying to himself and misleading the parliament on what he's doing, because the Australian electorate can work him out. They knew 12 months ago that they had doubts about him. 12 months on, those doubts have been confirmed. We have inequality in our society, and it has been compounded by the failure of the Abbott government to create opportunities for the overwhelming number of our people on lower fixed and middle-income Australians. Now this government is undoing the good work we did, and they're lying about it. This is the Prime Minister who is used to making excuses for lying. He actually said, "Don't listen to what I say, make sure you get it in writing." This is the letter he gave in writing to Australians. This is a letter to pensioners. Greg, don't say anything, you might learn something. This letter to pensioners is lying about pension cuts. It proves what he writes is as worthless as what he says. I'll repeat that. This letter to pensioners lies about the pension cuts, and it proves that what he writes is as worthless as what he promises in an election. $1.2 million of taxpayer money for a letter is not worth the money the paper it is printed on. What an extraordinary display of contempt for Australian pensioners and Australian taxpayers from this slippery Prime Minister. Let me say again for the people of Australia, the Abbott government is cutting the pension, and now they're trying to gag debate on the future of the Australian safety net. They want to drop the guillotine on bills that threaten the decency and generosity of Australian society. We will oppose these pension cuts. 3.7 million pensioners will be up to $80 a week worse off within 10 years. The Parliamentary Budget Office has confirmed this fact. The veterans' pension. They make me frustrated beyond all belief when they talk about their love of the flag and their love of veterans. It only extends as far as a parade and a salute and an RSL function. When it comes to actually standing up for veterans, well, then that's a different issue. These are patriots to the very superficial level that we see. A $65 million cut to war pensions is little service or recompense from this government. The Department of Veterans Affairs currently provides 140,000 service pensions and 84,000 war widower pensioners. All of these people will be up to $80 a week worse off within 10 years. Then you look at the deeming rates. See, not content with going after the full pensioners, they've also had enough time in their busy diary to go after part pensioners too. Part pensioners face a double hit through reductions in their part pensions because of the government's plan to reduce the deeming rates. As a result, if a pensioner has some shares or small fixed-term deposit in the bank, they'll be punished by further reductions in their part pension. We've got the world's oldest retirement age, and this again goes back to the out-of-touch nature of this arrogant government, increasing the member for Flinders. The worst sort of workplace injury he'll ever suffer is a paper cut, yet he wants everyone else to work to 70. Increasing the pension age to 70 is an attack on the Australians who do the real heavy lifting. We on this side of the House know the real Australians who do the real work. Many of us have spent our working life representing tradespeople, labourers, cleaners, nurses, other Australians who make a living with skilled hands, strong minds and strong backs. Many Australians started work at 15, not playing in Liberal student politics till they had to finish. It is disgraceful that this government wants them to force to work until they're 70. Until they're 70. Look at them sitting opposite, trying to interject pathetically. They want you to work to 70, but they haven't thought about how you lift workers' compensation beyond 65. Usual Liberal. No idea. No idea. No idea. I think Alicia Silverstone will play Greg Hunt in the movie of Clueless. At the same time, they're freezing superannuation, abolishing the low-income superannuation contribution, undermining the ability. Well, I love this mob opposite. They will lift superannuation. They will give a tax holiday to people who have over $2 million in their superannuation retirement, but they'll introduce a new tax on 3.5 million Australians who earn less than $37,000 a year. We couldn't have written this script. We could not have believed they would be so mean-spirited, but there they are at it again. We believe that Australia should have the world's best retirement savings system, not the world's oldest retirement age. They don't know anything about pensioners' cost of living, otherwise they wouldn't have axed the $1.3 billion in funding for seniors' concessions, money which assisted seniors and pensioners for electricity and water bills. Look at Greg Hunt. Look at Greg Hunt. Says he's a great man on bills. Well, I tell you what, you've taken 1 point. The member for Flinders. The member for Flinders. Thank you.
Opposition leader to refer to members by their titles. Please.
Okay. Well, I was going to call on the Minister for Environment, but no one believes that. But I thank you for your direction. Electricity and water bills, transport costs and council rates. All Australians will pay $7 extra time they go to the doctor. Oh, member for Flinders, we'll talk about what you've done right up to the next election. Don't you worry about that. And then when we learn about this GP tax, we learn more about the hidden costs of this GP tax, and the more we learn, the worse it gets. Medicare, and this would probably be useful for someone to send this transcript to our Prime Minister who didn't have a clue today about diagnostic imaging. Medicare provides around 23 million diagnostic imaging and pathology services. The Australian Diagnostic Imaging Association estimates that the GP tax will reduce funding to these services by $188 million in 2015-16. It's a 10% cut, Prime Minister, in rebates for general patients who were previously bulk billed for pathology tests and imaging, due to the abolition of the bulk billing incentive from the 1st of July next year. The abolition of the greatest permissible gap safety net, a safety net which moderates the cost of high-cost items, is gone too. As a consequence of the GP tax, some patients will now be forced to fork out hundreds, if not thousands of dollars up front to pay for MRI, X-rays, CAT scans and mammograms up front. This will apply to many cancer patients and to holders of low-income health care and pensioner concession cards. They're ripping out $1.3 billion of the pockets of Australians by increasing the cost of medicine. Then there's the family tax benefit B changes. I thought these people opposite said they were great friends of families. Heaven forbid. Please do not be our friends in future. Just stay right away. Because there's more than 700,000 single-income and single-parent families are going to lose the family tax benefit B over 3 years as a result of this savage mugging by the Abbott government of families, just because their youngest child turns 6. Because of Tony Abbott, a single-income family on $65,000 with 2 children aged 8 and 14 is going to lose over $6,000 per year by 2016. These payments help families struggling to make ends meet keep up with the cost of living. As John Howard said when he heard about this raid on family tax benefit B, these are John Howard's words, family tax benefit B are not welfare payments. They're just a recognition through the tax payment system of the undeniable fact, as all of us in the room have been parents know, that it costs money to have children. I don't often agree with the former Prime Minister, but even a stop clock can be right twice a day. And then we look at their attack on young job seekers. More than 100,000. Are you still here? Okay. Under Tony Abbott's budget, more than 100,000 young people under 30. Go look for your walrus. 100,000 young people under 30 who are looking for a job will be forced to wait 6 months before receiving any income support. We said, Labor has said, that the changes to New Start are perhaps the most heartless measure in a very ugly, brutal budget, sentencing young people to a potentially endless cycle of poverty when they should be getting a hand to find a job. It is just a blame-shifting, cost-shifting measure that puts the price of unemployment onto the unemployed and their families. And the Human Rights Committee, chaired by Liberal Senator Dean Smith, agrees. They have concluded that Mr Abbott's proposed 6-month New Start waiting period for people under 30, and I quote, breaches the right to social security and the right to an adequate standard of living. Labor has clearly and consistently called this policy for what it is. It is a vicious, victim-blaming measure that does nothing to address youth unemployment or the challenges of finding work. At a time when youth unemployment has soared to 13.4%, around double the national average, now is not the time for the Abbott government to turn its back on young Australians. We know in this place that the Prime Minister's literary propaganda aside, reducing pensions and attacking the poor and vulnerable does not help this country grow. It is long overdue in this country that we have a debate that the link between a more equal society and economic growth is inextricable, and it is true. This is a government who talks about growth, yet they would create greater inequality in our society. You cannot have fair income, sustainable growth unless you have measures which create more equality in our society. And I say it again, if the Liberals want to go after the pensioners and the vulnerable and the families, they're going to have to come through Labor. We say to the government today, you have drawn the battle lines for the next election. Labor has always pioneered advances in social services. We have always believed in the betterment of the people, and we have been most interested in the great welfare of the middle class, of the lower-income people, fixed-income people and the most vulnerable in our society. The current Liberal Party does not deserve the name Liberal, and the next election Australians will be asked to choose. Choose between a party that protects the pension and a party that cuts it, between a party that stands up for families and a party that forgets them, between a movement that will always fight for you and a Prime Minister who lied to you to gain your vote at the last election.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition knows he should not say those words. I'd request him to withdraw.
All right. I withdraw, and the Prime Minister, who passed himself off at the last election in return for your vote, undertaking to do one thing, and he has broken that contract and done something else.
I would request the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw. Thank you.
I'll withdraw it, but it doesn't change what I just said in terms of this Prime Minister passed himself off at the last election as promising to do one thing, and instead, after the election, done exactly the opposite. But that's okay, Prime Minister. We say to the Prime Minister about his unfair changes, and this bill, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Australians want to know that they are part of a society that values all of its citizens. Australians want a society that does include the homeless, that does include the unemployed, that does include the lonely, that does include our older Australians. Australians do not want a government that would weaken and break the relationship between any of our individuals and the communities in which they live. Australians do not want policies which add to the insecurity, add to the misery and add to the want of many Australians. There is a clear choice, and that is the contest. And what I promise the government is Labor is up for this fight. We will fight your changes, we will defeat your changes, and at the next election there will be a reckoning between you and the Australian people. Yeah.